When you look at the big picture of global economics, it really does feel a bit like watching a high-stakes strategy game, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. Constant moves, counter moves.
Exactly. And right now, there are some pretty significant shifts happening, especially when you look at the US, China, and what all that might mean for India.
Hmm.
So today, we're diving deep into a really interesting analysis from the Indian Express. It unpacks this whole scenario, the potential impact of the Trump tariffs, plus China's wider economic goals, and how India fits into that picture.
Yeah, this is definitely a critical moment to be looking at these dynamics. I mean, predicting the exact fallout from something like the Trump tariffs is always, well, uncertain, isn't it?
Sure, always tricky.
But the Indian Express piece makes a strong case that the current global situation, it's created a really unique window for India. And importantly, it stresses these tariffs aren't just, a simple fix for trade deficits.
Right, there's more to it.
Much more. They reflect deeper strategic anxieties in the U.S. about China's growing global power.
Absolutely. And for our listeners, especially those of you working hard for the UPSC exams, this is exactly the kind of analysis that's, well, incredibly relevant.
Have to.
We're touching on themes crucial for mains papers, current affairs, economic development, and, understanding these global dynamics is pretty fundamental for prelims, too.
Couldn't agree more.
So our mission today is basically to unpack this Indian Express analysis, pull out the key insights, and really help understand the strategic choices India is facing and the potential paths forward.
Sounds good. So maybe we should start with China. They're obviously a huge part of this story. The analysis really leans into China's long-term economic strategy, referencing Rush Doshi's The Long Game. What's the core ambition there?
Well, what's really striking is just the sheer scale and persistence of it.
Hmm.
As Doshi lays out and the Indian Express piece echoes, China's big goal has been to essentially replace the U.S. as the world's top economic power.
Right, a fundamental shift.
Exactly. And their main tool, it's been this very deliberate, long-running use of mercantilist policies.
Okay, maybe a quick refresher for listeners. What does mercantilist policies mean in practice here?
Good point. It's basically a strategy where you aggressively promote your exports while simultaneously making it harder for imports to come in.
So things like government support for local industries, building up massive foreign currency reserves.
Precisely. And focusing constantly on having more exports than imports. And the data the article brings up, it really shows how incredibly successful China's been with this.
Yeah, the numbers are quite stark, aren't they? A jump from just 4% of global manufactured goods exports back in 96
90.
to around 30% now. I mean, overtaking the U.S. in that metric, that's a huge transformation. It wasn't just cheap labor either, was it? Strategic investments, infrastructure, state support, all played a part. Lessons there for India, perhaps.
Definitely lessons there. And the analysis makes this crucial point. China isn't just using these policies. They apparently hold the world record for how intensely and for how long they've stuck with this mercantilist approach.
Wow. So not just a phase.
No, absolutely not. It's been baked into their strategy for decades. Okay, so that's China's playbook. Now, what about the U.S. reaction to this rise?
Well, what's really interesting here, and the Indian Express points this out, is the kind of bipartisan agreement that's emerged in the U.S. on how to deal with China.
Yeah, that was a bit surprising, wasn't it? Seeing Biden continue, even ramp up some of Trump's policies.
It surprised many, yes. It really signals this widespread concern across the political aisle in the U.S. about China's global influence.
And the most visible results of this, certainly in the context of this analysis, is the tariffs, the so-called Trump tariffs, though, as you said, the thinking behind them goes beyond just one administration now.
Exactly, and the specifics are important. A general 10% tariff across the board, but then this much heavier, targeted 125% tariff specifically on Chinese goods.
125%, that's huge.
It's massive. And it's set to kick in from what the article calls Liberation Day, April 2nd, 2025. It's clearly aimed at China. But tariffs like these, they inevitably ripple through global supply chains, right? Which could, perhaps unintentionally, create openings for others.
Right. Okay, so we have China's strategy, the U.S. tariff response. Let's bring India into focus. The Indian Express analysis looks at India's own economic story. What's the baseline there?
Well, India's growth over the last 30-odd years has been pretty impressive on its own terms. The article mentions a consistent average growth rate of 6.2% annually over 33 years.
Which is solid growth, no question.
Absolutely. But the analysis also digs into why India seems to hit these roadblocks when it comes to pushing through deeper, more, let's say, transformative economic reforms despite that growth.
Ah, the structural challenges. What does the article pinpoint?
It highlights a few things that are kind of interlinked. There's a level of political risk aversion, governments being wary of reforms that might stir up opposition or hurt established interests, understandable perhaps. Then you have the nature of the political opposition, often fragmented, making it hard to build consensus on tricky economic issues. And crucially, the influence of what the article calls rent-seeking elites.
Rent-seeking elites, meaning?
Basically, groups or individuals who benefit financially from the current system, the existing regulations, the status quo, and so they naturally resist changes that might reduce their advantages. Think like heavily protected industries where lack of competition benefits the existing players.
Okay, I see. And that resistance, it's a major theme. The article uses the farm laws as an example, right? Contrasting the huge pushback there with how non-economic reforms sometimes sail through more easily.
Exactly. It really highlights that point about political risk, doesn't it? Non-economic changes often don't directly threaten powerful economic interests in the same immediate way. Economic reforms, though, they often mean shifting power, changing who benefits, and that can provoke really strong resistance. Though the article does hint that sometimes this resistance might be more about protecting those benefits than genuine risk. Wouldn't you agree?
That's a fair reading, yeah. It does suggest the risk might sometimes be spun to protect vested interests. And this hesitation on reform seems to have real consequences, especially looking at foreign direct investment, FDI. The numbers in the Indian Express are, well, they're a bit worrying.
They are quite stark. A drop in FDI from a pretty healthy 2 to 2.5% of GDP over the last couple of decades.
Right.
Down to less than 1%. That's a level not seen since the late 90s. It's a significant fall and definitely raises questions about attracting the capital and tech India needs for future growth.
And the analysis links this, at least partly, to a specific policy, the 2015 Model Bilateral Investment Treaty, the BIT. How did that treaty potentially make India less attractive for investors?
It's a fascinating example of how legal details can have big economic effects. Essentially, the 2015 BIT changed the rules for resolving disputes. It required foreign companies, if they had a dispute with an Indian entity, to go through the Indian legal system first to sort out the terms of disengagement, which, from an investor's point of view, added layers of complexity and perceived risk compared to previous arrangements. It seems to have made some foreign investors think twice.
Sounds like a case of maybe unintended consequences there. Now, the analysis also talks about a missed opportunity for India back around 2010 when China started moving up the value chain in manufacturing. What happened then?
Yeah, this is a really key point the analysis makes. As China shifted focus to more advanced, higher-tech goods, it kind of opened up space at the lower end of the manufacturing spectrum.
Right, the less complex stuff.
Exactly. And countries like Bangladesh, Mexico, Vietnam, they jumped on that opportunity. They attracted investment, built up capacity in those areas. But the Indian Express argues that India, probably due to some of those structural issues we discussed, didn't really grab that chance as effectively as it could have.
Okay, so that's the complex backdrop. China's rise, U.S. tariffs, India's internal hurdles, and maybe some missed chances. But now the analysis suggests these Trump tariffs, even though they started as a U.S.-China thing, might actually create a strategic opening for India. How so?
This is where it gets really interesting. The Indian Express views these tariffs as an exogenous shock, an outside force shaking up the global system.
Okay.
And this external pressure, it potentially gives India what the article cleverly calls plausible deniability.
Plausible deniability?
Yeah, it allows the government to argue, look, the global rules are changing because of these tariffs. We have to make these reforms now to stay competitive. It can make it politically easier to push through changes that might otherwise face strong domestic opposition from those vested interests we talked about.
That's a smart take, using an external pressure point to drive internal change. And the article also mentions another big plus for India right now, the demographic dividend.
Absolutely. India's young, growing, increasingly educated workforce, especially with rising AI skills, this is seen in the West as a major strategic plus.
A counterweight to China.
Potentially, yes. In a world worried about China's dominance, India looks like an increasingly attractive partner and alternative. This geopolitical angle could give India more leverage in attracting investment and building economic ties with the West.
So putting it all together, the global shifts, India's own situation, what's the core choice India faces, according to this analysis?
The analysis frames it as a choice between sticking with the relative comfort of the current 6.2% growth.
Which is decent, but maybe not game-changing.
Exactly. Or making a bold move towards much higher transformative growth, maybe 7.5 to 8.5% by undertaking those deeper, more comprehensive reforms. It's about whether to maintain course or really seize this moment for a major leap forward.
And what are the key reforms needed to unlock that higher gear? What does the article stress?
It points mainly towards deep deregulation, really cutting down the red tape and complex rules that often hinder business and significant trade liberalization, opening up more to attract that crucial FDI, basically clearing the path for manufacturing and exports.
It really sounds like a call for a fundamental rethink, almost echoing the 1991 reforms. Does the Indian Express suggest we could be nearing another moment like that?
That's definitely the vibe, yes. The analysis implies that this mix of global pressure and India's own needs might just create the conditions for a kind of second 1991 moment, another wave of significant economic opening. And things like the expected India-U.S. bilateral trade agreement, which could then lead to deals with the UK, the EU, they add weight to this idea of a potential shift towards a more outward-looking policy.
Okay, so let's try and synthesize this for our listeners, especially the UPSC aspirants tuning in. What are the main takeaways from this deep dive into the Indian Express piece?
I think the biggest message is that India is at a really crucial point. These global shifts, particularly the U.S.-China tensions and the resulting tariffs, have opened a window of opportunity. It's significant, but it might not stay open forever.
A time-sensitive opportunity.
Exactly. India has the chance now to use this external dynamic, leverage its demographic strengths, and push through those economic reforms that have been discussed for years but often stalled. The choice is whether to settle for solid but perhaps unspectacular growth, or to aim for something truly transformative that could make India a major global hub for manufacturing and investment.
It really boils down to strategic ambition, doesn't it? Comfort zone versus a potentially a much bigger prize, but with the risks and challenges that come with major change. And for all of you preparing for the UPSC exams, we really hope this discussion, based on the Indian Express analysis, has given you some valuable food for thought on these critical current events.
Definitely.
Thinking about how these shifts impact India's policy, its place in the world, these are core issues for prelims and mains.
Absolutely. We'd encourage you to think critically about these links, consider the different perspectives, and mull over the long-term implications of the choices India makes now.
And we'd love to hear your thoughts too. What do you think? What are the biggest hurdles or opportunities? Please do like this deep dive if you found it useful, subscribe to the deep dive for more analyses like this, and drop your comments and questions below.
And just to reiterate, all the insights and analysis discussed today were drawn from the reporting published in the Indian Express.